It's fun to see everyone again.
Yeah.
I tilt this down so everyone can see my Asian American Girl Club sweatshirt.
We're representing. All right, we're live.
Okay. Can we do this thing? All right.
Let's do it.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AAPI Book Month Festival and to our panel, Beyond Fractions, Writing and Living the Mixed Race AAPI Experience. My name is Heidi Heilig, and I am the author of several series, including the Girl from Everywhere series and the Shadow Players series. And I am going to moderate today. And so I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. Keala, why don't we start with you because you are on my upper left.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Keala Kendall. I'm a mixed race science fiction and fantasy writer from Molokai, Hawaii. I'm currently on sub with 2 adult sci-fi novels, and I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Sarah, why don't we turn to you?
Okay, I'm Sarah Kuhn. I'm a writer of books and comic books. Most of them are about either Asian American superheroines or nerds in love. I write a series called Heroine Complex, which is a superhero series. I write YA rom-coms like I Love You So Mochi, and then my new book is called From Little Tokyo with Love. And I write quite a bit of license. So I wrote a graphic novel called Shadow of the Batgirl, which is about Cassandra Cain, who's the Asian American Batgirl. And I wrote a Star Wars audiobook called Dr. Aphra.
Wonderful. Karuna?
Hi, I'm Karuna Riazi. I'm a middle grade fantasy and sci-fi author. I'm the author of The Gauntlet and The Battle, both of which are from Salam Reads. One came out in 2017, the other came out in 2019. I also retold The Jungle Book for Sesame Workshop's Ghostwriter series. Yeah.
Excellent. Pearl?
Hi, my name is Pearl Lowe. I'm a storyboard artist, illustrator, and comics artist. I currently work at Cartoon Network on Craig of the Creek, but I'm also adapting the Bailey School Kids books into graphic novels, and the first volume, Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, is coming out August 3rd. Super excited for that, and I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. And last but not least, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Kuss. I'm a senior editor at Rick Riordan Presents, and I acquire middle grade and YA. Yeah.
Awesome. Short and sweet. Okay, so we're going to do about 45 minutes of conversation with questions and sort of back and forth. And then we're going to leave it open 15 minutes at the end for Q&A from the audience. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them out. And we'll get to those, as I said, at the end. But why don't we just jump right into this awesome question list. And I'm going to ask the first one. When people who aren't mixed race talk about the mixed race experience, there is so much focus on pain. And as our panel description says, we are often reduced to fractions, puzzles, and tragic ciphers. What are some joyful parts of your mixed race experience?
I can start with this one because I think I actually came up with this question because like it says, I feel like there is a lot of focus on how sad we all must be being part of two worlds yet not part of either. I feel like there's a lot of language around that when our experience is described by people who are not us. So I think for me, I came up with this question that I really had to think about it, but I did want to highlight some joy. And I think for me, that's come from a couple different places. One is certainly community, being able to find community with the sort of greater Asian diaspora, around the world, here in the States, just everywhere. And then also finding that with other creatives, like this panel. I think it's really cool that we have this panel, that it exists, that we can have this discussion. And I know certainly whenever I share anything on social media about being mixed race or just the kind of specificities of that experience, I feel like I get a lot of response from people just sort of feeling affirmed and seen. And I have certainly felt that way when I have seen, things pop up on social media. So, a lot of times from you all, like quite a bit. And I think it's a nice feeling because, I grew up in a really small, really white town. There were not a lot of people of color period. And the only mixed people were, me and my brother. And then there was one other mixed Asian family who had 2 mixed race daughters. So we, of course, became best friends. But I think there's just something nice about being able to connect with people in a greater sense about how specific that experience is, and, feeling like we can really see each other as full people who have full experiences, and finding places where those experiences are the same and when they're different. There's just something really beautiful about that I have had a wonderful time embracing in adulthood.
That's so beautiful. I'd love to touch on the community aspect of that too, because I feel like, when we talk about mixed experiences and the topic of fractioning our experience, I actually really think that from my experience, being mixed just has created so much abundance, because it's not like lesser than of like any part of yourself. It's like layers of experience on top of each other. So I feel like I've been able to connect with so many people and create different types of communities, even if it's outside of the, the communities that I belong to, the Chinese community and, the Black Jamaican community, just because of like different people's mixed backgrounds. And like, when you kind of put out your own personal experience, people are like, oh, like I feel that too. Like I went through that too. And so it's been really nice to like connect to the Chinese community, to the Black community, and then just to the general like mixed community too, because it's just so rich and there's so many of us, and it's just really, it's just really abundant. I really love it.
I'd love to touch on what Pearl and Sarah said. That's kind of what I was thinking of when I heard the question, or what are part of, the joyful parts. And I think you stand, especially when you're from a multi-ethnic background, or like multiple, not just white, you stand to like inherit this whole culture from all sides. And there's a lot of pride there too. And I think it's hard because a lot of the time when we see, especially mixed race stories not being told by mixed race people, a lot of those stories focus on the pervasiveness of their whiteness or their proximity to it, rather than, well, here's the culture, like here's like all the great stuff. And I love the abundance of it. And it's like this inheritance of culture and the communities, and it's all so great. I love it. And the food. I have a lot of good food in my family. That's all.
Yeah, well, sometimes we also I feel like there's also creation of dishes that feel very I remember one thing that my mom was Japanese American, like monoracial, full Asian. And but we grew up in this white place, and she was second generation American, so very Asian American. And the dish that she used to make was teriyaki hot dogs. And that to me feels like a very Asian American dish, even though, it sounds kind of funny. And I still haven't been able to, even though it seems like something that should be so simple, it's not something I've been able to replicate yet, as well as she did. So that's my that's my tragic biracial quest, is to replicate my mom's teriyaki hot dog recipe.
My mom does something really similar. It's like the most American dish, hot dogs and beans, but she puts like water chestnuts and kimchi into it. And it's truly just like the taste of my childhood. So food to me is like one of the most joyful things about the mixed race experience, like how it all just kind of comes together and then you can eat it.
All right. Does anyone else have anything else to add? I love all of these answers. It's funny. I have two sons now, like very small sons, and one of them, he looks very white, but he eats all of my Asia. He eats ramen, the spicy sesame, the kimchi. He's 3. And just like he eats kimchi out of the jar. And my older son, who looks more like me, more mixed race, he's very much, he eats like my husband, with like the white people food, with the, with the carrots and hummus, and very he wanted to be a vegetarian for a while, and I was like, okay, that's all right, but where's your char siu pork love? But I got it from the white looking son, and I just think, I look at him and I think it's funny because I always thought of him as my white looking son, but he's not, because he's part Chinese. So this is just now what, I'm able to colonize. Maybe this is rude, but I'm able to colonize my husband's white family with my. And it's so joyful to me. I'm I can get back at all this stuff. Maybe that's very rude to say, but I'm kind of a jerk. So that is my joyful mixed race experience. Does anyone else have anything less rude to add?
I mean, yeah, like everything everyone said is just like so beautifully put. But your remark about like decolonizing, I don't know, like recently I've kind of thought about how like, you know, being like South Asian and Black is like two different like sides of like the like, you know, resistance against colonization came together to make me. Which is why sometimes I wonder why my mom asked me like, why are you so like upset about this? Why are you so fired up about this? It's like I have two different bloodlines that, you know, had to fight. But at the same time, it's kind of beautiful to see like, you know, after centuries of us trying to be pulled apart and, you know, have these differences between us so that we can't come together, you know, like it really makes me proud to be able to say like, you know, I'm mixed race and, you know, I'm here because two families came together and they shared their you know, their backgrounds, and you know, it resulted in like a new generation that has a different experience but still like, you know, the same way you all were saying about community brought together those communities and like, you know, found unity in like, you know, those two different heritages. I don't know if I'm saying that right or if that makes sense, but you know, like it's just how I've kind of felt about it recently. Particularly because my mom's been looking through a lot of old photos and like, you know, she found an old photo where my Bangladeshi grandmother and my African-American grandma were hugging each other and crying because it was the first time they met each other and they were like so happy. I was like a baby at the time. And like, you know, they were just so happy to see each other. In the picture, they're just like holding hands and crying over each other. And it's just like, it was one of those things where I was just like, actually, like, I wish I could have remembered that moment. That was like such a blessing to see like those two sides of the family like supporting and loving each other, you know? That's just something that I just really find like, you know, proud about my experience and about like, you know, connecting with people. It's really just a special, you know, experience to have, and it really just makes your community so much wider and wonderful.
And that I think is really lovely also, because I feel like one of the kind of stereotypes about I mean, honestly, Asian American families in general, but also mixed families, is that they all hate each other. Like, you know, like it's like always like a Romeo and Juliet, like these two things fighting situation. Whereas I think it's beautiful to put out there that the reality of that is actually this can be also a coming together of love, a coming together of cultures to make something, you know, new and quite beautiful.
It's super interesting too, because like I find that the more I am aware of like my mixed experience, you know, as I get older and stuff like that, I feel like there are so many parallels between my Black culture and my Chinese culture. Whereas before I was like, ooh, like maybe that, you know, I feel like they are at the other, like they're at different ends of the spectrum, but they're actually like, there's so many things where I'm like, oh, your mom used to do that to you? I was like, listen, I grew up with that, and my mom's Chinese. She's not Black, but like there's so many different things, and like even dishes too. Like there's this fruit in Jamaica called junep, I think, and it looks like longan, sorry, fruit. And I'm like, oh, even like some of the certain foods, there are like different kind of like, there are parallels, and it's just really nice to be like, yeah, like it's not like, oh my God, this is so difficult to integrate. Oh my gosh, my life experience is just always clashing. It's like, actually, there's like a really nice harmony that can happen. So.
That was wonderful. I you know, we talked a lot about community, and our next question is kind of more about that. I don't want to make us rehash things. We already said so many beautiful things about community. But if anyone else, I love the story, Karuna, about the photograph that you have, that sort of experience you have over that photograph. And does anyone else have anything like special to share about your community experiences, or that moment you found community, that moment you first started to see that there were more people kind of like you out there?
I think like something that Karuna's like story made me think about is just like how this interacts kind of with you know your larger family unit, right? So one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is I always feel so heartbroken when I hear from mixed race people who have experienced so much racism, like within their families, or you know, within like just like made to feel like they don't belong within this family unit that, of course, they very much belong to. And one thing that I am very just so grateful for is that I think my mother was very invested in making sure that I knew that I should sort of appreciate every part of myself, that it wasn't sort of about like cutting myself into different identities or trying to embrace one thing over another, or, you know, she never sort of treated me like I was weird just for existing. And she was also, I think, really invested, even though we were growing up in this super white small town environment, in making sure that I knew that I should be proud of who I am, you know, and making sure that I knew sort of what Japanese American culture in particular was. You know, she was the person that I learned about incarceration from, because that was not something that I learned at school. She was the one who made sure I knew sort of, you know, what, like, not that long ago, it was actually illegal for me and your dad to get married, like things like that. And even though, again, we were not living in the most diverse area, I think she made sure that I had a connection to that culture. You know, she would take me up to like Portland, where some of our family lived. And, you know, there they still had the big Japanese festivals every summer. There was a little bit more of a Japanese American community up there. And so I think she wanted me to see that that was something I could really be connected to and that I could be part of. And I think that made it, you know, somewhat more natural then when I moved to areas that were more diverse for me to seek that community out and for me to feel like, yes, this is something you can be part of. This is something that is accessible to you. This is something that is part of you. So retroactively, you know, I'm sure I was a bratty tween teenager at the time, but I'm just really grateful that she made sure to sort of instill that in me from the beginning.
I see we've lost Keala briefly, but we're going to continue and hopefully she will return.
My internet completely dropped out, so I'm on my phone's Wi-Fi now.
Oh, I love that backup. Pocket backup Wi-Fi.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. But Sarah, I loved what you were saying about your mom being that conduit. It's funny. My mom, she's white, and my dad is the Chinese one, and or my dad is Chinese, and it was actually through my mom. My dad is kind of he's kind of a weird guy. He's interesting, but a weird guy. And so he wasn't like, he was great at playing when we were kids, but as we grew older, like teenage years and stuff, he really couldn't connect very well. And that was when we were starting to like understand that like culture existed like as culture and not just as like, oh yeah, of course we go to Chinatown and like pick up food and like we do this and we do that. Like I started to understand like people did different things at their homes and that not everyone lived the sort of hodgepodge way we did. And so my mom started really encouraging me to talk to my grandma, my Chinese grandma, and like to learn her recipes and to go over to her house after school every day and like to sort of get a sense of like where my that side of my culture came from, because my dad wasn't as good at like communicating it. So my mom was like the driver through my grandmother in a weird way. And then I just remember that most of the time that I was over at her house, I actually was being made to clean her glass louvers on her windows, but then we would do recipes later. but I also got that side of culture too, where it's just like, you gotta listen to grandma. So I love that like different members of the family, even if they are not like the people who embody that culture, like my mom was still really encouraging me to like understand it.
I can totally relate to that. I feel like I grew up with a single mother, and my mom's Chinese. So I didn't really have like a strong Jamaican influence in the household, but I remember from a very young age, her really trying to like cook Jamaican food for me. And I remember thinking like, like that's really interesting. Like I didn't think that she would have this type of skill, but she would make jerk chicken, she would make dumplings, she would try to do different curries. Like I thought, like now thinking back on it, I'm like, wow, that's like a lot of effort of trying to, especially when like the population of Black folks here is like less than 2%. So there aren't many folks that I could have connected to, especially back then. So her effort to kind of be the one to try to just like make sure that I know that that's part of my identity. And I think that's partially why nowadays I'm like, I have like an iron grip on like food and my culture. And like, just because I think that's the strongest tether that I have to my heritage. So I'm always like, oh, like I want to make sure I know these recipes. I want to make sure I know how to cook and like share it with people too, because I feel like that's also a form of storytelling and getting to know people on a deeper level. But like I can totally relate to like the parent from the opposite culture or your other culture trying to instill that part of your culture to, like within you. It's pretty cool.
It's interesting because I had a similar experience growing up, but in a way that wasn't super positive just for like the Korean side of me. So my mom immigrated to America after she married my dad, who's white and also Orthodox Jewish. And so when we were growing up, we were raised like purely in the Jewish community. So we were the only mixed race kids within the Jewish community. I went to Jewish private school, and my mom, I think, really kind of embraced that for us because she saw it as kind of like our proximity to whiteness being like the easiest way for us to kind of navigate the world. And so she really just fully embraced Judaism. She converted. She like sent me to Jewish summer camp and like knows all their prayers and like she knows how to cook literally everything like better than my bubby, better than my dad. And so for me, when I got to college and into my 20s, it was really up to me to kind of navigate then like trying to embrace kind of my Korean side. And then as I got older, kind of Pearl, something you said earlier, like really struck a chord with me, kind of like as you got older, seeing like the similarities between kind of like both sides of your mixed race experience. And for me, that was something that's like really come to light these past couple of years, just like in some ways how close the experience of being Jewish and being Korean are. So yeah, I definitely relate to kind of like the whole like parent really embracing like one side of you and kind of pushing you towards it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience in that my mom, when my Bangladeshi grandmother came over, she only came once because she really felt out of water in America. So like throughout her life, we tried again to get her to come to America when I was older, but she never came after that one time. She came when I was like 6 months. But when she came, like she taught my mom like every single like one of her prized dishes, how she made her rice, how she made her dal, how she like did this and that, to the point that honestly, out of all my mom's sister-in-laws, everybody always says that my mom's cooking tastes closest, and she's the only non-Bangladeshi daughter-in-law in the family. She's the only one, so I guess that's our point of pride. And I just kind of felt like throughout my childhood, like even though I spent the most time with my Black grandparents, I spent every summer at my Black grandparents' house, and I loved them dearly. And there was a lot of connection there because they were the grandparents who are closer, are here, and spoke the common language. It at the same time, it was kind of like I always had this sort of like tug of war where like my surrounding like Muslim community is like nearly entirely Desi South Asian, so it's kind of like a pressure to like present Desi to like be relatable and have friends in that community, but at the same time it's just like at the same time this is not fully me. And I had a lot of experiences where it was like I would try to go to one side and it would just be like kind of like subtly from the surrounding community, you aren't actually in that much of that side. Particularly I'm speaking about the South Asian side, where it was just like, well, your dad didn't like, I used to be able to speak Bengali, but I can't anymore because my dad said that I need to speak English because this is my country and I need to assimilate better. He didn't want me to have an accent or anything like that. So I can't speak Bengali. I can understand it, but like, can't speak it. So like, then it would just be like, you're not a good enough, Desi girl. You don't, observe the culture enough. Even if you wear shalwar kameez, you're still not fully, never mind, like, I don't even want to start touching on the anti-Blackness that would like crop up. It was like, it came up that you have a Black side of the family. to the point that recently, I got somebody complimenting me and saying, "Oh, you don't look Black," like, like it was an honor or something. I was just like, "Excuse me, I look like my mama." Like, don't start that with me. But like, it's kind of like it's an interesting experience because it wasn't my extended family. Like, my Bangladeshi grandmother never ever in her life was, racist. She adored my mom. But like, it was just like the surrounding community that had like that sort of friction and that sort of, resulting in me feeling like, oh, I have to like, I have to honor my Bangladeshi family by showing I'm Bangladeshi enough. And then later in life, it's like, well, like, I'm both. Like, why do I have to kind of divide myself up, or why do I have to justify, to the surrounding community that I'm half, like, by saying, oh, I'm half, but I still can do this like you. It's kind of interesting because it's not the same situation, but it was still kind of similar where for years I just kind of tried to say I was in this bucket more than the other bucket when in the past few years in particular, I've kind of been like, this is who I am. This is what makes me who I am and what makes my voice, what makes me strong. It's actually both sides of me and how that family came together, like I said before, with, mutual love and respect to raise me and like, with respect for both families. Both sides of the grandparents spoke highly of each other. Both sides of the family have interacted and, asked respectfully, like, after each other, even though they haven't like communicated directly in years. But just understanding that, to honor that and that background I came from the most is to like, kind of decolonize myself and take away that part of me that was taught for years that I had to be one side or the other. I'm not sure if any of that made sense at all.
No, that's beautiful. And that's really, I just want to like also quickly touch on that just because of the anti-Blackness that you brought up. I feel like when my mom first married my dad, she was actually disowned from her family and they didn't talk to her for a few years until I was born. So that was really real in my family. And I think the first person who actually reached out after a long period of silence was my great grandmother. And like I thought, and on my Chinese side, I thought that she would be the most, stubborn because she's, oh, she's older, she's set in her ways. But I really do believe that like people can change. It takes a lot of work. But she was the first one to kind of like bring the family together. And I think that for a long time, that sort of dynamic of like proving, like you were saying, choosing a side, like, oh, I'm Chinese, even if I don't look Chinese, I'm Chinese. I think that whole battle of trying to prove that you're one, you belong to the culture that you belong to is exhausting. It's a lot. And I think, like you say, you reach a point where you're like, this is me. I don't even need to prove it. Like, this is who I am. Like, I don't actually have to like say like to you reasons why I belong to the culture I belong to. Like, it doesn't matter. But it is really, really helpful when family decides to like open up and take in both cultures,
I love that. Thank you all for these, amazing, the things you're sharing are I don't know, like it makes me want to skip ahead in our questions, but I will go through the list. But I would love to talk a little bit more as we go on about the anti-Blackness and the difficulty within our cultures of dealing with these problems and talking about them openly. And I think this is such a good. I'm so glad we're able to do it now. So let me go to the next question. I know I'm like allowed to do them out of order, but let me just go to the next question just now. So what are the biggest misconceptions about the mixed race experience? Have you seen that reflected in fiction and other media?
I'll go. I think I said this last year, that mixed race equates to biracial, with whiteness being the other side every time. And it kind of just, because of that misconception, I see a lot of, this might be jumping ahead to another question, a lot of stories that emphasize biraciality from a white viewpoint. And I kind of touched on this earlier, and it's kind of hard because when people hear I'm mixed race, they're all like, oh yeah, I can tell because you look really white. And I'm like, I'm actually a lot more of the other things than I am white, but surprisingly, to be just really brief about it. But I just wish people saw that rather than it's between 1 foot in one door, like you're standing between thresholds. You're in a room of your own with a bunch of other people, and there's a rich community, including your own family. I am lucky enough to have 5 siblings I love to death. And, you know, when I'm like, do you guys know what I'm talking about? When I have an experience, my family's the first people, like the first people I turn to. And I rarely see stories focused on mixed race families as a whole. And I'd love to see more of that, because as you can tell from like the stories we've heard, and sorry I missed some of them when I blipped out, but you know, I love the stories about the families coming together and like, oh, making sure you're a part of the, you know, your other parents' culture. Like they're both very supportive. So I think there's a misconception that you're pulled towards one or the other rather than the abundance. Anyways, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously there is still this issue with kind of always centering whiteness, like always seeing that as like either, you know, if you're mixed race, you must be at least, you know, some white. And also that there's this it kind of like the story kind of revolves around that, you know, how white do you look? How, you know, how like colonized are you? Like all of these things I feel like end up being sort of the things seen as like, well, this is the obvious story. This is like what we still center. And I would really love it if, you know, that we could deconstruct that even more in stories and just kind of get away from that idea that whiteness is what always must be centered. And I think the other thing for me in a sort of broader sense is that for whatever reason, I feel like being mixed race, multiracial, biracial, whatever you are, however you describe it, is one of those things that it's kind of like being a writer wherein everybody who is not that thinks they know exactly what it's like and feels free to tell you that to your face. And it always feels like these weird projections, right? Like these weird like assumptions about what your experience is, because for some reason, everybody thinks they must know what it is, you know? So there are those weird microaggressions that are supposed to be compliments. You're so beautiful. You're so exotic. What are you? Can you explain your entire genealogy to me? Can I stare at your face as if it is a puzzle I must decode? That must be really fun for you. You know, how can I really stare at your face so I can say like, how Asian do you look? How much of a percentage can I make that in my mind? And it's always very weird. It feels like, in a way, we're sort of always reduced to concepts instead of people. Like a lot of times I feel like someone is viewing me as this like exciting or weird concept, and I'm like, no, it's I'm still a person. Like there is still, again, like this totality of experience that you are perhaps not seeing, and you know, sometimes I have to really kind of talk to people about like, where is this coming from? Why do you think you know better than I do what kind of racism I experience, what people think when they look at me, you know, how I might have grown up? Like all of these things feel like things that for whatever reason, a lot of people seem to think they know a lot about. And I think that then as far as stories, we then see that reflected in that, right? So we see like sort of our experience, you know, processed through what someone thinks it must be. And that's how I think we get a lot of these stories where multiracial, biracial, mixed race people are just sad or are just tragic or is sort of there to teach someone else a lesson about something, you know? So for me, I think that's like the biggest misconception that I wish we could get rid of is just that everybody seems to think they know what this experience is like, when in fact there are also many differences within that experience of what that experience is like. You know, we all have told different stories and described different things. So again, I guess it's like a part of like the thing where I would love for people to see us in our totality, in our wholeness, and what the fullness of that experience is.
Yes. I feel like, I guess it just comes down to like writing dimensional characters, because I feel like it's a human experience still, the mixed race experience, mixed ethnicity experience, you know. But I feel like a lot of times there are assumptions that people put out, like, oh, you're biracial. Okay, so you got to be half white. The white parents got to be the father. The Asian one is the mother. Like, you know, or like if you have like a Blasian character, it's like, oh, well, obviously the dad is going to be the black one. And then, you know, like, it's just kind of like, okay, but like, you know, there are different types of families that are like with so many different dynamics, like what Sarah was saying. And like, I also feel like, and this is like me thinking about just like also some representation that I've seen talking to like some of my Blasian friends in Japan. They're like, we only see ourselves as like supermodels or like really like, yeah, like the ones to come in and swoop and like fix the situation and then they're out. I'm like, okay, but like I want to know about this person. I want to see what they're like. And like, we're not all supermodels. Some of us are just regular. We just want to be low key. Like, we don't have to be like these like super dazzling types of people. We can be, but I don't think we should only be those types of characters in stories. So I really think that it just comes down to actually having mixed people in the writer's room to have to, you know, give that kind of lived experience, to give that authenticity in scripts, in novels and stuff. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I think that there's a weird like fetishizing of like the mixed experience that people really like feel like it's fun to like write about just because like, oh, the turmoil, oh, we gotta write about this in this way. And I'm like, oh, okay, like I feel like there's like there's variety that needs to come in at that point.
Yeah, I like, as everybody's been talking, I've just been really thinking about it. And like just in general, I feel like not just particularly from the angle of the publishing industry, I think I feel like mixed race is really daunting for an industry that loves to kind of like shoehorn people. And it would just be really nice to stop being seen as a trope. I feel like, you know, Pearl and Sarah have really done a good job of just demonstrating how many tropes we're like, you know, assumed to fit into. And it's like, well, where do I fit as like, you know, the like, you know, biracial kid who had a good connection to both sides of the family and isn't like, you know, just kind of lost and stranded and, you know, relating to her family purely through whiteness. Like, where do those kids stand in it? I remember we had a conversation a few years ago where some well-meaning non-mixed race and not even people of color authors were like, well, like, you know, maybe we should just be writing whole characters. Maybe like, you know, we shouldn't be giving authors the chance to write like half white characters. And he's like, excuse me, like POC mixed race people exist. Like, please don't like come in and start trying to like, you know, like say that this is a trope and not actual real people. And also like, you know, mixed race people with a white parent also still need rep. It's not like we're saying that they don't need rep either. We're saying they need better rep and that all of us need to be kind of seen as existing as well. Like, you know, it's just kind of interesting how things get conflated as the industry tries to simplify it and like say, okay, well, this is the one story we want to see you all in, so this is easier for us, you know, and like, so this is the mixed race experience, this is the full race experience, which also differs, and this is where we're at. This is fine for us. I think it's something that definitely, like Pearl said, like more mixed race people need to be in the writer's room, and then more mixed race people need to be in the room that's bringing in the writer's room to, you know, understand how that should go and how those people should not be shoehorned into what experience they're representing.
Yeah,
No, sorry. I don't want to talk twice, but I really like what everyone has said so far, especially with like kind of this commodification of the mixed race experience as a way to like self-insert white writers, it feels, in the writer's room. To talk specifically about TV, like I can tell the difference between a character written by a mixed race character written by a mixed race person and then someone written by a white person who's kind of written as diet white, not to be spicy, but it's like, and then the person of color parent's dead and it's like, oh, I was raised white, but I'm spicy because sorry, not to be rude, but I've seen that so much. So I just want to say, I agree. And I think people in the audience, be clear, we're not saying like, oh, we can't have mixed race characters with white parents. It's just who's telling those stories, and is it a way to put your own stamp on it? Like if you're a white person writing that. So that's all. Sorry.
Yeah.
I
Well,
honestly,
I think it's like for a while it felt like certain white writers, like they're sort of solved for like, oh, I have to include diversity in my story now, was to include a biracial character who was of course always white and who was basically a white person with like a little bit of soy sauce. And it's kind of like they're like, this is how we fixed it. Solved. Diversity solved. And it's sort of weird. And then I've also heard this other thing coming from, again, mostly white people, where they're kind of trying to, again, like solve for diversity. And they're like, well, isn't it more diverse? Isn't it more diverse if this character is full X? Like, isn't that more like progressive? And you're like, well, I mean, that's a very weird way of putting it. Like, it's kind of, I think either sort of shows that whoever is saying that doesn't actually know what that experience is and probably shouldn't be writing it, because it is specific. I mean, we've all talked about our very different experiences. That is specific. So,
I think it does all come to the fact that a lot of people, even people that are not white, but everyone centers whiteness as like what it is, and how far away you are from whiteness, it's like you're adding a little flavor or like more flavor, but like it's all white at the core. And like and then stories about mixed race characters that don't have any whiteness in them whatsoever are so confusing for people, because they're like, well, what is it then? And it's like no, these are people that are not, it has nothing to do with you, maybe, and like for once, but it's like they have no idea where to start with that.
White people can't imagine a world that has nothing to do with them. Are you kidding? That's not.
It's insanity. Everything's upside down. No, it's true. So was there anything else we should add? Because I really did want to get to this last question. We did speak a little bit about our own experiences of being mixed race and putting those into stories, and seeing what we'd like to see more of in stories about mixed race characters. But is there anything else anyone wanted to add to that wonderful discussion?
Well, one thing I wanted to maybe talk about a little was, I think From Little Tokyo is really the first book where I have written very directly about the experience of being mixed race in a certain community, right? So it's about kind of this girl who is mixed, Japanese American, white. She exists in a mostly Japanese American community. And that's not the only reason why she kind of feels like an outcast. She's also a tragic orphan, maybe. And there are some other things happening. She has a bad temper, like, etc. But I think what was interesting to me about that book was it was actually quite difficult for me to write anything that I thought might put the Asian American community that I hold so dear in anything that wasn't a positive light. So, in this story, I felt like things got a little messy. This character does actually talk about finally sort of the ways that certain things that happen within Asian American communities that are maybe not so great, and I think these are things that it was touched on a little bit earlier, we still have kind of hard time talking about, colorism and sort of purity policing and all of these different things within the community that, at some point I think make everyone, regardless of what your background is, feel like they don't belong or feel like they aren't enough or feel like they aren't, representing properly or like whatever it is. And so I think one thing I would really like to see and that I would like to try to do in my work going forward is to really engage with those complications, engage with that complexity, because I think that is something that is very real. And while of course, we talked a lot about, there is so much joy in that experience, there is so much joy in community. I love all of my Asian American communities very much. There are also things that happen that, can make people feel unwelcome. So I think this was, one of the first, after, writing for however many books, however many stories, some of which did still center mixed race characters, this was one of the first times that I really tried to get into that a little bit more, and how, you know, sometimes there are things that are maybe not so great within the community that we could work on. So I think I would love to see more stories that engage with like that complexity, that specificity, and that just kind of messiness, because even though, again, I love these communities, obviously there are things that, you know, we could stand to work on.
Yes. Sorry, I know we have to move on to questions, but I just wanted to quickly add on to that if we want to start talking about these types of nuances within the mixed experience, we need to give, you know, people inside of stories and outside of stories space to do that, because we can't say that we don't tokenize mixed people and then shove them in a box, don't give them space to breathe and express who they are and why they do certain things the way they do because of certain beliefs and experiences that they've had, and expect us not to be like, no, you oh yeah, you're not tokenizing. Like, no, you need to give people to be space to be able to be dimensional and to express their different types of lived experiences, or else you're just gonna be like, okay, we're checking the boxes. Okay, we got a mixed Black person, we got a mixed Asian person, we got, you know what I mean? Like, we need to like give people space to breathe, and that also means more stories, because one character can't be one thing to everybody. We got to have multiple things going on. So that's all.
All right, we are at 45 minutes. So I know that we might want to take in some audience questions here. Let me see. Okay.
Oh.
For those of you that have incorporated your mixed race identity in your stories, what aspects of that experience did you choose to include or actively not include, and why? Good question. Is anyone brave enough? And of course, Rebecca, this could be, you know, for things that you've acquired or in ways that you've edited. Of course, modify if you want to answer.
Well, I think for me, you know, that was, I guess, a good, you know, kind of what I was just talking about, where it took me a while to really incorporate, I guess, the fullness of that. You know, in my first book, in Heroine Complexes, you know, these two Asian American girls who become best friends, and they really bond over their Asianness and the fact that they are the only two Asians in this one class, and they both bring in food for the snack that the other kids think is weird. Like, it was sort of this this very Asian American experience, and a lot of people told me they really connected to that, but I didn't really contend with then how the character who is biracial feels sort of within that. You know, there was sort of no real difference between how they process through, you know, what, like, all the sort of racism they were getting, or the way that they became friends. I was sort of like, this is about, you know, being Asian American. And I think it was only, you know, with this latest book, and I think it was really because my editor, Jenny Buck, who's amazing, also an Asian American editor, which is so cool, she actually kind of pushed me to do that. You know, she was like, if you're comfortable, I think there is something here that is very poignant, and that is something that is relatable, not even just to mixed race people, but to other people in the Asian American community who maybe feel like at one point or another they have not been enough, or they have not been really Asian, or, you know, whatever it is. And so I was like, okay, but yeah, that was very scary for me, because I didn't want anyone to think that you know, what I was saying was, oh, you know what, it's really the Asians that are the problem. Like, it's really, like, I was like, no, I still think it's the white people who are the problem. Like, I will try to make that very clear in the text, but I would like to show, you know, again, that sort of complexity of, like, this character is, you know, like I think I've done in the past, almost trying to flatten herself so that she fits into a certain box. You know, she's trying to kind of take the nuance out of her experience so that she can just be uplifting this greater idea of community. And she feels so bad about anything she feels that's even a little bit negative, that she never really says anything until later. And something that, you know, I think a lot of times with YA, it's almost like I'm writing, you know, a letter to myself, and I don't realize it until later. But it was almost like telling myself, like, it's actually okay to say these things. You know, it's okay to bring them up in sort of your eagerness to make sure that you never hurt anyone ever, you are actually kind of hurting yourself, because you are not allowing these things to be said. You are not allowing them to be known. You're kind of flattening that experience because you feel like it's not uplifting to the community. So that was definitely something I struggled with, but I'm really trying to move forward so that, again, I can include more of that complexity that I'd like to see in stories.
Similarly for me, my latest series, Shadow Player series, is about a bipolar shadow player, and it's an Asian fantasy, sort of pan-Asian fantasy. And I, being bipolar myself, I saw, and having mental illness like on both sides of my family, I saw how generationally and culturally all sides handled it very differently as things sort of went along. And I wanted, when I was writing these books, what I wanted to do was write something that was uplifting and hopeful for people with mental illness. But I didn't, or I mean, relatively, it is YA fantasy, so there's like some dark times, but relatively hopeful for people with mental illness. And so I felt like, in a way, my white side, my mom had gotten into like, you know, those like 80s and 90s like self-help movement that finally like led her to like having a good experience with therapy, whereas like my dad's side was very like not into talking about it at all. And so I kind of used what I learned from one side to like feed into like my own wishes for myself and how I would have been able to handle my mental illness, and use that in my story to make a sort of a better, more idealized version that still had like elements of sort of a truthfulness to my experience, but was not exactly true to life, because I didn't want to sort of give people, pass on that that baggage that I had, that I had grown up with.
Yeah, that's so relatable too. Sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know if you've seen the meme on Twitter. It's like, oh, let me just sprinkle a little bit of my own experience to make the story relatable. And then it's like, the next meme is like someone's cooking on the stove, and then it's like flames. And they're like, oh, it's too much. Sometimes I feel like there's like that balance that happens when you write stories. For myself, I primarily work in animation for kids TV and for film. So there's always kind of like a certain level that you can't really go beyond sometimes because it's kid stuff. Even with the Bailey School kids, you know, I always try to bring my mixed experience, my lived experience to whatever I create. But sometimes I'm like, okay, how deep are we going with this story? Bailey School kids, sometimes it's just like, oh, we don't really go too much into, you know, their personal lives. Okay, well, at least I can do it on a visual level, you know, and like try to see where you can insert that kind of representation where you can. And like for myself, I think one of the strongest like representations of like my lived experience I put into a story recently was Hair Love. And even though Zuri, is not a mixed girl, I also had, because I was raised by a single parent and she was Chinese, she had no idea what to do with my hair. And Zuri's father, who had never done her hair before, had no idea what to do with her hair. So in those ways, I try to bring my mixed experience to my storytelling. Sometimes, it's not always expressed through a mixed character, but at least you can kind of bring those types of authentic story pieces to whatever you're creating.
Great. Next question, it looks like. All right, from Allie. Would you ever write a mixed race character with ethnicities that are not your own? How far do you cross the line into another culture that isn't your own?
Yeah, I can start out on this one. I think that it needs to be done as respectfully as we do when we're talking about writing cross-culturally in general. I think what we've all been kind of touching on is that mixed race has been often treated as people of color light, or marginalized person light, and it's really not the case. There's this whole complexity of the experience. It's not a one size fits all. Everybody has a different way of approaching it. I think that, in terms of crossing the line in general, cross the line does sound a little negative. I think it's like being invited in that space means researching and saying, okay, so how does my mixed race experience identify with this experience? And, what ways am I going to have to dig deeper get like, authentic readers to back me up on this or tell me what's like, wrong with it, and listen respectfully when they're telling me that, maybe this is your mixed experience, but people, in this area generally don't, have that experience. You have to be willing to listen and, be aware that, yes, we do share that experience, but the experience is going to look, very different, and it's going to feel very different, and just trying to communicate that while communicating like how common some other aspects are. And I'm speaking like from experience, because I do have like a work in progress in the future that involves like a mixed race character with ethnicities that are kind of close to my own, but not fully. So it's nerve-wracking, but I think it's a matter of, just with anything else, respect, and also realizing when you're out of your field entirely and you might want to pull back in and be a little closer to your own self.
I'll touch in on this. Something I've thought about lately, and it's been with like kind of this, I don't want to use the word like explosion, but like a recent increase of mixed race protagonists and like perspective characters in fiction, especially, is if you are going to write it, for me, I'll never say never, but there are certain experiences I know I'm not equipped to write, despite, I'm from Hawaii. There's a bunch of cultures there that I lived adjacent to my whole life that I feel like, okay, I could probably write a character who's maybe not a perspective character, but I feel I would be able to write that experience, especially with research, accurately and respectfully, hopefully. But at the end of the day, there are certain things like, I don't think I could ever write a Jewish character. One, I'm secular, but like that, I know that's not something people think about, but I didn't grow up adjacent to any Jewish community, really. So I don't know things, and I feel like I would accidentally wade into something I don't know. But something I think about is, if you are going to write a mixed race character, or make sure that whatever you're writing, or whatever perspective you're writing, that like, if you're writing someone who's Hawaiian Japanese, I'll just use this, you have to know Hawaiian Japanese relations. You have to know how those communities respond. Like, I don't want to like talk over on any of your guys' experience, but you've both mentioned as Blasian creators, your own experiences there. I don't think I could write a Blasian experience personally. That's something I'm not connected to, but like, there is anti-Blackness. You just have so much you would have to know about. And I would just want to make sure I was being as respectful as possible. I hope that answers the question. Sorry.
That's great. All right, I'm Kat. In the Asian diaspora, we still struggle with discussing intra-community issues, colorism, intersectionality, purity policing, etc. How might we move forward in a genuine way to have these discussions? And this was the question I was trying to get to. Thank you, Kat. This is a great question. And thank you for it, Sarah.
This is a hard one. It's just like, this is a hard one. And I feel like a lot of it has to start with labeling things as a problem. I feel like 2020, we've done a lot of practicing of that, labeling bad things as bad things. But I think that, from a Chinese Black perspective, I feel like a lot of Chinese folks still here anyway, Chinese folks that I've met, not all obviously, but like the model minority myth is very real. And I feel like a lot of them just think that you just got to do better. You just got to work harder. And our oppression is the same. So if we can do it, you can do it in the same way. And I think that when we tackle different intra-community problems, that we have to recognize that we don't move the same. Our communities face different types of obstacles and oppression. And with that comes having conversations about, like, honest conversations about what we face, and not being like, well, you should be pulling up yourself by the bootstraps. I don't know what to tell you. You're just not working hard enough. Or like, not really pitting against each other, because we live different experiences. There are ways we can come together through those differences. We find commonalities, but I really do think first step is like, we gotta talk, and we gotta label things as bad things. And then we gotta think of next steps without taking into the context of the white gaze and white approval, because I feel like if you're always looking towards like white approval for trying to solve these issues, you're just gonna keep going in a circle being like, we should just be doing this. And I'm like, well, that's a kind of like a colonial thought. Like, you think you should be doing this because white people tell you that this is the solution to being seen as lazy or to be seen whatever, you know? So I really think that it takes decentralizing yourself from that and having honest conversations between both communities.
Yeah, I think Pearl really just hit it 100%. All the points that I would make as well. I would say that, like, you know, I feel like there's still a great deal of defensiveness when the word anti-Blackness comes up, and it's just like, you know, we need to be honest about it because it's happening, it's constant, it's real. I think I told this story last year on the panel, but I literally got pulled aside by an auntie at the masjid, and she was like, "Oh, I like, you know, have you met anybody?" And I was like, "No, I'm still single," because you know how aunties are. And she's like, "Oh, like, you know, maybe if you didn't say you were like, you know, Black so much, like it would work out and you would find somebody." You know, like this stuff is real. And then, like, you know, people get defensive and they're like, this is how they were taught. And, you know, we're not on the same level as, like, you know, racism that we face from white people, but we need to acknowledge these sort of inter-community issues and how real and how like continuous they are. We haven't gone past them. Still a couple of months ago, when we saw the uptick in, like, you know, Asian elders being attacked, there was a very like strong back surge of, you know, we're going to kind of hit back against the Black community. I saw like some very anti-Black posts from authors in the Asian community who I know very well and usually respect, you know, kind of saying like, well, you know, you all cared about Black Lives Matter. Why don't you care about us now? When all I saw the whole day was Black authors posting about Asian hate and saying this is, like, you know, going to stop. And white authors were holding their peace, but we don't go after them, you know? So it's kind of like this, like, there's these subtle, like, baked in issues where, you know, people have to be aware, like, you know, why do you feel more comfortable, like, coming after a Black woman author if you don't see her post about it for half an hour and, you know, you're not going to go about, like, you know, fussing at a person of color about the same sort of, you know, problem? Why do we, like, you know, kind of slam down ourselves first and then, like, you know, look at the greater problem of white supremacy that's holding us all down and started these whole divisions in the first place? So I think just giving the space and also coming past the situation where I'm not sure if everybody else had this sort of upbringing where it was kind of just like, we don't want to criticize internally because there's so much problems externally and we don't want to, like, give, like, you know, the white community an opportunity to criticize us, but we have to, like, you know, move past that. Yes, saving face, really just saving face, like, you know, it's kind of just like, I even had this conversation with an author of color last year where she was like, I feel so concerned that we're kind of outing some stuff recently, like, and I feel like white authors are, like, you know, like looking at us and saying, well, they're criticizing us, we don't have it together either. And it's like, look, the writing community as a whole, like, you know, we struggle a lot with facing our issues, but that doesn't mean we have to, like, you know, curtail everything that needs to be said because we're worried about how somebody's going to take it. Like, you know, all of us have to clean house. That's kind of the reality of it. And, like, you know, we just need to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And, you know, it does make things harder. It does make things more stressful to have these, like, you know, inter-community issues, especially when we don't always have a good platform to do it and we're having it in public. But we need to start having it because that's the only way to, like, you know, heal and move forward and stop having these issues constantly be an issue, you know, when we have more important things to, like, you know, fight about, like Asian elders getting beaten up. Like, that was the big thing. It shouldn't have had to be like a derail where, like, you know, there was a lot of Blasian authors going, this is anti-Black wording, and it became like a side dialogue and a fight that didn't have to happen. You know, we could have focused on the bigger thing if it wasn't something we hadn't addressed, you know, or been able to address in the past. Like, we could have gone through that and unpacked that already.
100% that. I just have a quick sentence to add to it is, like, coming from a marginalized group does not exempt us from marginalizing others and the ability to cause harm. I've had a couple discussions with other Asian creators about, not here, but offline, about how just because you're not white, we're not white, it's you aren't exempt from perpetuating it. And white supremacy, unfortunately, that's how ingrained it is, and like with settlerism and colonialism. And so that's all. That's the one sentence I can think of to sum it up.
That's a good sentence, though. Very good sentence. No, I really love what everyone said so far. I think that, you know, it's one of those things that, like Karuna was saying, like, we have to be okay with being uncomfortable. And I think for me, I've also learned that I really have to be okay making other people uncomfortable, or doing or saying something that might make other people uncomfortable. You know, that is very anti my very Japanese American upbringing. It was sort of like, no, you're always supposed to make everyone else comfortable. Like, you weren't supposed to make them feel bad. You weren't supposed to cause conflict. And so I think that is usually which might surprise some people who follow me on Twitter, but actually that is my first instinct, is not to cause conflict. But I think that especially after whatever this long, horrible period we've been in, I've just felt like, again, there are a lot of things that I have not said, or that I have perhaps not said aggressively enough, to things that are actually very much not okay. You know, I mean, just speaking even on the what you guys were talking about as far as things like anti-Blackness within the community and things like that. I remember, you know, like when Black Panther came out, and all of a sudden the sort of rallying cry from different parts of the Asian community were, oh, we need to get our own Black Panther. And I was like, why is that? Why is that the response to that? Like, why is the response like, how do I get mine? How do we get ours? Like, and why is the way you want to do that to directly copy something else? Like, that just seems like a weird way to go about it. So I think that, you know, and then, you know, again, like the things that are just said within the community to people who are, you know, mixed race, or are like of different ethnicities, or whatever it is, these are things that kind of become like this wallpaper, right, where they're just said, but nobody really pushes back against them. And so I have certainly tried to put myself in the mindset that all of this is part of the same thing. All of this is part of what leads to, you know, violence within our community, violence perpetuated against our community. And it's really something that, you know, I want to step up and say those things, you know, say those things, push back against those things, try to just like not be in the mindset of how do I make both myself and this other person comfortable, because I think all of us being uncomfortable or making other people uncomfortable is really one of the only ways to truly move forward.
Agreed. I think okay. One more. We have one more question, and I know we're a little bit past time, but if we can just say for one more question, it is, can you share some media or stories that you think encompass the mixed race identity in an authentic and or positive / uplifting way? And I would love to hear from Rebecca, because I haven't heard your voice in so long.
Oh my gosh, I have so many. I mean, I think my number one would be To All the Boys, just because that was the first book that I read, and I was in my late 20s by the time that I read it, that was by a Korean author, and it featured a biracial Korean American character, and that was so special to me. I read it over and over and over again. I told my husband that we couldn't get married until he read it too, and he did. He read all three. So I love those books so much. And what I love about them the most is that, like, Laura Jean in that book is just like very proud to be Korean and American and biracial, but the books aren't about that. That experience is just kind of like baked in, and it's not something that causes problems in her life. It's not something that she has to come to accept about herself. It's not something that she has to like grow into. It's just who she is, and you see it just happening on the page, and it's so beautiful to me.
And then also those books also have kind of something that reflects stories we heard earlier, where the white dad is trying to make Korean food. Like, he's trying to make Korean food. And it's usually like actually kind of bad, but they love him so much. They're like, no, it's great. Like, let's send some pictures to your grandparents. Like, I thought that was very precious. I think for me, I would say I really love Akemi John Bowman. I love her books. I think she's such a beautiful writer. And that is one of the first times I've really felt like I can see some of my own experiences on the page. You know, her book Starfish is about a biracial Japanese and white girl who is sort of dealing with different things from parents, you know, from a white mother. This wasn't my experience, but from a white mother who kind of tries to make her think the Asian parts of her face are ugly. You know, I think that's something that a lot of us can connect to, whether it's a family member or someone else who sort of makes those not so subtle remarks. And then, you know, some of her other books, like Harley in the Sky, is like literally about a girl who runs away to join the circus. And it's just like the way that she incorporates the experience of being multiracial with also these very like lovely, poignant, often very fun narratives feels like something that I just would have died for when I was younger, and honestly still do a little bit now.
I was trying to find your book, Heidi, The Girl from Everywhere, on my shelf. That's why I was like, where is it? Because the black colored books are down here. And I was like, I'm sure I have it behind me somewhere. That was one of the first books I read. And it also takes place in Hawaii. Spoiler. But I really loved it. And it was beautiful to see like parts of my culture on the screen, in the text, and to read about, you know, I don't want to spoil it, and it's been a while actually since I've read it, but like she's able to travel to all these places. Heidi, step in if I mess a detail up. I read it a while ago.
No, you're so kind. You're so kind to say it. It was
like, oh, go.
No, it was just, it was a weird, it was an amazing thing for me to be able to write a biracial character. And I had never actually seen a biracial character in a book before my own book. So that was like the first one for me. And then there was this amazing, this explosion of actual biracial folks writing their biracial experiences. And then they weren't just like half white and half Chinese like mine. And that the Gauntlet, and it was like a seminal one for me. I was like, oh my gosh, it's not white at all. It's like so great, and like it was so fantastic. But yeah, I think that the books by the authors here and the work by the folks here is pushing things forward in an amazing way. But thank you so much, Keala. That's so kind.
When I look at everyone here on the panel, I feel like that ball pit meme where they're like diving in, and it's like, yay, all these beautiful, all these great mixed race perspective books. I'm just really excited about it, because I know growing up when I was super young, I never would have thought I'd see a book taking even place in Hawaii that wasn't about like tourism or something. And so, or seeing like a half Asian character, or even, anyways, yeah, I'm just really excited about it. That's all.
So I'm just going to shout out real quick. It's an anthology, Color Outside the Lines. Spoiler that I'm in it. Though my story, I still feel like my story didn't follow the rules of the anthology. But it was an anthology spearheaded by Sangu Mandana, where it was pretty much like love stories, like interracial love stories. It's a YA anthology. And that was like a really beautiful, like uplifting coming together of multiple like really talented authors who all tried to discuss and bring that experience through love stories and meet cutes, and it was a lot of fun to read and contribute to, even though I didn't follow the rules. But that's a really great anthology that actually directly was based on bringing out more of the mixed race experience.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a hard time finding stories that speak to me personally in my mixed experience. I feel like just because a lot of them have been like in proximity to whiteness. But I will say that I definitely cried when I read Shadow of the Batgirl, because Sarah, because when I saw a Blasian character in that book, I turned around to my friend. I was like, there's a Blasian character in this book, and I started crying. And I think that was the first time that I really felt like I needed that. I think, you know, sometimes when you don't have something for a very long time, you don't think you need it. And then once you get that dose, you're like, hold on, I've needed this more than I thought. And that's how I felt when I read Child of Black Girl. But also, even though they don't really go into, you know, the mixed race experience, it was nice to see on screen, you know, Kipo, the Wonder Beasts, you know, her dad is Black, her mom is Korean. That was really cool to see. Yes, she's purple. She does not have curly hair, but the parent representation was nice to see. So that those two come to mind.
Oh, well, thank you. That I love that everybody on this panel is like, this other person on the panel. That's very warm. You're like, whoever said the ball pit, like, yes, I definitely see it. Yes. But yeah, I can also tell you, Pearl, that Eric was a very popular character internally at DC. Like, I heard like feedback that like they were like, I don't know who else said it, but you know, the book gets passed around at various stages, like to a lot of different editorial and marketing and stuff. And my editor, Sarah, was like, oh yeah, everybody loves Cassandra, but then they're like, oh, Eric, he's so interesting. He's so cute. Like, everybody just loved that character. So it means a lot to me that just seeing that meant something to you. That's just so cool. And yeah, I love that we have like our fun multiracial ball pit happening.
To contribute to the ball pit, my husband worked on Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beast. He's a storyboard artist as well. But anyway, sorry.
Yay!
I mean, and even like, I think it's a good point too that even sort of like incidental things like that can be very powerful. I mean, one of the last things I saw right before lockdown in the pandemic was the tour of the Frozen musical, and I didn't really know like what the casting was or anything, but for that particular tour or show or whatever it was, they gave Elsa and Anna the mom was Asian. So it was, I think that, I can't remember what race the dad was, but it was like the mom was Asian. And then one of the little girls playing Elsa was also Asian. So it was like, oh, right. There's like a baby Asian Elsa. Like, that's not something I ever expected to see. And then I think when she turned into an adult, she somehow turned into a white lady. But just like for that moment being like, Elsa and Anna's mom is Asian. Like, I never thought of that. So even things like that can, I think, be very powerful.
Yes. That reminds me of the whole, like, Ariel can be Black. Like, people just go off. We want more representation. We're so happy for anything.
I agree, and I think that is a wonderful high note to end the panel on. More mixed race representation in everything. I want all new works by all of you to read and pick up next year. Let's get on it. And all of you listening, if you're writers or artists or in the creative field, you also need to get on it. Auntie says so, because I want to read all your works as well. I want to just say thank you so much to Cat Cho and Asian Author Alliance for helping us put this panel together and hosting us today. And I wanted to thank my wonderful panelists for sharing such insightful and thought-provoking stories. I just want to wrap up by saying that please, everyone, let's go in order and tell everyone tell our audience where they can find you and your works once this panel is over. Again, I'm Heidi Heilig. You can find me at HeidiHeilig.com or Heidi Heilig on Twitter. Sarah, take it away.
Yes, Sarah Kuhn. You can find me on Twitter at Sarah Kuhn, just my name. You can find me on Instagram as Sarah Kuhn Books. And I do have a website. It's just heroinecomplex.com. That's heroin like superhero, not like the drug. And it probably really needs to be updated. But yes, that's where you can find me. And I would also love it if you would read my new book, From Little Tokyo with Love, because it is about a lot of things we've been discussing today.
Rebecca?
Oh, hi. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Reeves the Reader. And also just want to say that I finished your book last night, Sarah, and I cried.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Keala Kendall, and you can find me on both Instagram and Twitter at Keala Kai. And if you're an editor, hit my agent up if you want to see my work. That's all.
Do it. Karuna?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to figure out who was next. I'm Karuna Riazi. Same name, same handle everywhere, honestly, Instagram, Twitter. And yeah, I want to copy Keala and say, like, if you are interested in my work, I write across the board, and my agent is an amazing Asian American woman who would be happy to get in touch with you. So,
Love it. Pearl?
Yeah, you can find me at pearllo.com. You can see all my storyboard work, my illustrative work, and my comics work. You can find me on Twitter at Fumi_Chun, FUMI_CHUN. Same thing on Instagram without the underscore. And also, please look out for the adventures of the Bailey School Kids, Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, August 3rd. It'll be really exciting. I hope you can all read it.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you all for being here. And maybe we'll see you next year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.